headmaster. And I am not related to Dana Gioia, as many of you have. But I will say that I have known of Dana Gioia for many years, and I've always admired him. And it was very humbling when he met me yesterday, and he said, you know, a lot of people have asked me if I'm related to Brad Gioia. He was just being nice to me. We are very happy to have this association with the Trinity Forum. This is our third venture, and they've all been successful, and they've brought old and new friends to the schools, and they have this relationship with St. Paul Christian Academy, so it is a delight to have this evening. I think what has been most delightful is that people are hungry for some substantive conversation and interest in meaningful ideas, and I know you will have that appetite fulfilled tonight, because I've gotten to hear him now for the last 2 days, and he is sensational. So I look forward to being with all of us in this room for the next hour or so. And I'm going to turn it over now to my friend John Siegenthaler, who graciously agreed to be here tonight and make a few comments. John is one of the great treasures of Nashville, as you all know, and we are really happy to have him with us. Join me in welcoming him.
Brad told me I could say a few words if I would be brief. And so I will be brief. Over long life, I've observed many twists and turns, even frills and fads, as they have infected our educational system. The educational culture, as I look back over the years, from time to time, sort of changes directions, and I think that is reflected currently in the system, emphasizing, as it almost universally does, learning that best prepares students to become productive citizens. And now, the current system seems to invariably include science, technology, engineering, and math. Professionals refer to it as the STEM system of education. And as I think about that, and as I think about tonight, there's a danger in focusing almost exclusively on those areas to prepare students for a career. And the danger is that we take away interest in the arts. I know all of you affiliated with MBA are so proud of the leadership of Brad, because STEM has not turned MBA away from an appreciation of the arts. And I can't think of anything that better reflects that than tonight bringing Dana Gioia to speak to this audience. After earning a BA degree at Stanford and MA at Harvard, MBA back again at Stanford, he dedicated 1.5 years of his life, as some of you familiar with his poetry may know, to the corporate world as vice president of General Foods, and he began to write while he was there, and then gradually came to the conclusion that writing was really what he wanted to do. He was already publishing poetry and his work at the time he made this critical decision, but I think that's my wife, Brad, reminding me that I should be briefer. But he gave up that position as vice president. Yes, Dolores, I'm going to be brief. But he gave up that position to become a professional writer, poet, and critic, and this he's done. And his poetry from the outset won national awards. His Interrogations at Noon won the American Book Prize. His Can Poetry Matter was a finalist in the National Book Critics Award in criticism. He's taught widely, visiting writer at Johns Hopkins, Sarah Lawrence, Mercer, Wesleyan. I could go on a link telling you about him. I think the very best way to speak of him is to read what is my favorite poem by Dana Gioia. It's called Insomnia. And, you know, so many of us relate to this. Now you hear what the house has to say. Pipes clanking, water running in the dark, the mortgaged walls shifting in discomfort, and voices mounting in an endless drone of small complaints like the sound of family that year by year you've learned to ignore. But now you must listen to the things you own, all that you worked for these past years, the murmur of property, of things in disrepair, moving parts about to come undone, twisting in the sheets, remembering all the faces you could not bring yourself to love. How many voices have escaped you until now? The vending furnace, the floorboards underneath, steady accusations of the clock, numbering the minutes that no one will mark. Terrible clarity this moment brings, the useless insight, the unbroken dark. I love that poem. I love his poetry. I read you Insomnia because after he speaks tonight, it'll keep you awake all night. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, John. Good evening. I wanted to add my own welcome to all of you who are here tonight. I'm Cherie Harder. I'm the president of the Trinity Forum, and we are delighted to be here once again, working in partnership with Brad Gioia, the Montgomery Bell Academy, and Ken Cheeseman and St. Paul's Christian Academy. It's just really been a delight and an honor to have this partnership. We're also grateful to the many sponsors who have made tonight possible, and while it's a long list, I wanted to recognize each of you who have done that. The Cheris Foundation, which is a family foundation of Joe and Judy Cook. The Creed and Culture Fund, which is a family foundation of Byron and Beth Smith. Gary and Susan Dean, Joel and Stephanie Galanter, Nathan and Laura Green, Chuck Grice, Bill and Elizabeth Minkoff, John and Carol Peterson, John Siegenthaler Sr., thank you so much, John and Carol Rochford, Ridley and Irene Wills, and Morgan and Heather Mills. Thank you so much for all that you've done to make tonight possible. We're also just really excited to have a full crowd here tonight. And while we're happy that each and every one of you are here, there's a few special guests that I just wanted to acknowledge, including former U.S. Attorney General Alberto Gonzales and his wife Becky, Commissioner Bill Haggerty, and then, of course, the trustees of the Trinity Forum who are here tonight as well, our Chairman Price Harding, Byron Smith, Doug Wilson, and Gary and Marty Scudder, who are trustees of the Trinity Forum Academy. If you have friends who wanted to be here tonight but could not be, we will be both recording and live streaming tonight's event, and we'll post the video at our website, which is www.ttf.org. You're also welcome to add your comments and feedback to our Facebook page, as well as to our Twitter feed at Trinity, #TrinityForum, if you have comments that there wasn't time to get your question out or the like. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Trinity Forum, we work to provide a space and resources for the discussion of life's greatest questions in the context of faith. And we do this by providing readings and publications which draw upon classic works of literature to connect the timeless wisdom of the humanities with timely issues. Holding Socratic forums around the world, including an annual forum for Rhodes and Marshall scholars at Rhodes House at Oxford, to enable and equip leaders to grapple with those questions and to live and lead more wisely. And through sponsoring programs such as this one tonight, to connect leading thinkers with thinking leaders in engaging life's biggest questions, and ultimately to come to better know the author of the answers. The great questions of the humanities relate to the purpose and the content of the good life and the good society, what it is, what it means, and how it's realized. And for millennia, notions of truth, goodness, and beauty were considered to be primary in understanding such questions and in responding wisely and well. The good life, it was assumed as well as asserted, could not be envisioned or understood, much less lived, without them. Yet over the past few decades, such notions are increasingly ignored altogether in our public conversation. The idea of truth itself is often contested or placed in quotation marks. And there's a growing sense that the only reliable form of knowledge is empirical, and that the scientific holds dominion over what can be known and trusted. At the same time, much of our popular culture has been largely dismissive of the beautiful or the good, seeming to prefer the bad and the ugly. If it bleeds, it leads has long been a truism of television news, and what grabs eyeballs, raises viewership, secures advertisers, and generates profit often caters to the lowest common denominator of human interest: the trivial, the sensationalized, the violent, and the pornographic. By most common metrics of significance, eyeballs captured and profits generated, beauty, it appears, doesn't get a second look. But as our speaker tonight will argue, beauty matters, not only or even primarily in an aesthetic sense, but also morally, philosophically, and even spiritually. And as such, beauty matters not only in art, but in faith and politics as well. It's a provocative and a countercultural argument, and it's hard to imagine someone more equipped to make it, or who can make it more eloquently, than our speaker tonight, poet, critic, and former chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, Dana Gioia. Now, Dana is unusual among poets, as John pointed out, in that he is also a literary critic, an author, a marketing executive with MBA, not too many poets have that, as well as the former head of a federal agency. As a poet, as John said, he has published over 4 different full-length works of poetry, including Daily Horoscope, Gods of Winter, which won the 1992 Poets Prize, Interrogations at Noon, which won the 2002 National Book Award, and his last work, Pity the Beautiful, which he'll be reading from this evening. In addition, he's an active translator of poetry from Latin, Italian, and German, and composes opera libretti in his spare time. As a critic and an author, Dana's provocative 1991 essay, Can Poetry Matter?, was published in the Atlantic Monthly and generated for over 20 years more responses than any other piece of criticism, until it was finally knocked off its top perch by a story which encouraged women to settle when they marry. He's published various books of criticism, including Can Poetry Matter?, Essays on Poetry and American Culture, Disappearing Ink, and The Barrier of a Common Language. And His literary anthologies include 100 Great Poets of English Language, Literature and Introduction, and he's had articles, essays, and reviews that have appeared in such publications, including but not limited to The New Yorker, The Atlantic, the New York Times Book Review, Slate, and the Hudson Review. I'll also particularly commend to you one of his most recent articles, The Catholic Writer Today, which is really just an extraordinary piece in which we will have available out there afterwards. As the chairman of the NEA, Dana has been credited by no less a source than Business Week with an article that was entitled, "The Man Who Saved the NEA." I first got to know Dana when I literally worked right down the hall from him at the NEH, and I can tell you that this article was no exaggeration at all. Dana, by many measurements, has been the most successful and the most influential chairman of the National Endowment of the Arts that embattled agency has had. He was appointed by the president and unanimously confirmed by the Senate twice. It's very unusual for the Senate to agree on anything, and so for them to do that twice gives you some indication of his tenure there. And he succeeded in strengthening support for a previously and subsequently embattled agency. While he was there, he established the Shakespeare in American Communities program, Operation Homecoming, the NEA Jazz Masters program, and Poetry Out Loud, a national recitation contest which involved several 100,000 high school students. After leaving the NEA, Dana has divided his time between first directing the Arts and Culture program at the Aspen Institute, writing poetry, and collecting various awards, including at last count 10 honorary doctorates, and since then has gone on to assume the chair created just for him at USC on creative writing. He's also, I'm very proud to say, a senior fellow of the Trinity Forum. Dana, welcome.
Good evening. It is a pleasure to be here. Last evening I spoke at St. Cecilia's, and I can only imagine that the reason that several sisters have returned was that their confessor has required them to hear me again as penance for their sins. But I wanted to talk tonight about something that will probably seem to a lot of you a sort of vague and squishy subject, beauty. But I hope to make the case that understanding and rehabilitating this concept is actually at the center of the hope that I think all of us have for a healthier society, a healthier culture, and a more effective means of education in this society. Now, I am not a philosopher or a theologian. I'm not a metaphysician. I'm a poet, a part-time professor, and a former public servant. And as I said last night, it sounds like the resume of a washed-up kind of guy. But I'd ask you to bear with me tonight as I talk about what is essentially a philosophical matter, namely beauty. It's a subject we mostly ignore now, and I can see one or two of the more practical men in the audience already flinching at the mere mention of the word. Beauty as a term seems almost quaint. Philosophically, it seems like a notion borrowed from an earlier and simpler age. We have mostly discarded the idea of beauty from current intellectual and even artistic discourse. It's only used as a kicking horse. And when it is used by literary critics, it always either has quotation marks floating above it, or it is used ironically. But the absence of beauty as a positive concept has left a hole in our thinking, not only in philosophy and theology, but in education, in politics, and in public life. Now, we don't have time tonight to develop a philosophically rigorous or systematic argument about beauty. So what I'm going to do instead is to sort of explore the subject, walk around the subject and observe it, because I believe that the rehabilitation, the understanding of what beauty means would prove enormously useful to our culture and to our society. Now I'm going to build my meditation, my observations around 5 texts that span 3 millennia. The first is from Psalm 29, and I quote David's injunction, "Give unto the Lord the glory due unto his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of his holiness." Second, I'm going to take and explore John Keats's assertion that truth is beauty, beauty truth, to which he adds, rather preposterously it might seem, "That is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know." Third, I will consider Plato and John Hume's famous hypothesis that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Fourth, I'll use Oscar Wilde's assertion that man is hungry for beauty. There is a void. And finally, the great Russian Christian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky's bold, indeed seemingly outlandish claim that beauty will save the world. Now, since beauty is a concept that is badly understood and is rejected nowadays in most intellectual circles, I want to define it briefly. The word is so commonly cheapened and misused in beauty parlors, beauty aids, beauty pageants, that it seems more like a marketing category than a philosophical concept. So first and foremost, I'm going to ask you to understand that beauty is not a synonym for prettiness or any sort of external quality of being decorous or pleasantly attractive. Beauty as an idea refers to something deeper and more comprehensive than the surface attractiveness of an object. Perceiving beauty, we have the sense of seeing something perfect in its own way, a perfection not only apparent on the surface, but a quality we sense that takes us to the very heart of a thing. Beauty, therefore, is something we perceive both internally and externally. Now think of some classical examples of natural beauty. The sunset on an ocean, perhaps, a towering redwood forest. But the beautiful is not necessarily the pretty. We see beauty in a hawk swooping down to seize its prey, in the swirling cone of a tornado, in a thunderstorm sweeping across a valley. The experience of beauty is a human universal, though some people have a greater capacity for it than others, and each culture develops its own codes and vocabulary to express it. Beauty has an odd and singular effect upon us, so singular, in fact, that our experience of beauty deserves a special attention. I think it's there that we can understand it most clearly. Now, what happens when we experience beauty? I think it tends to fall into 4 stages, or at least 4 stages. A smarter person than me might be able to find 8. The first is the arresting of attention. Everyone in this room is too busy, is too distracted, has so many things that are sort of impending on your life at every moment of your life, internally and externally. But with beauty, no matter how busy we are, we suddenly have this arresting of our attention, a moment of stillness, an unexpected slowing down, where we want to saturate ourselves in a particular object. And secondly, with that, we experience a thrill of pleasure. And it's an unusual thrill because it usually seems disproportionate to the object's importance to us. I mean, why would a bird, a clump of flowers, a tree, a painting, a song give us such joy? And the pleasure is both physical and mental. It affects our physical senses, our mind, our emotions. Sometimes it triggers all sorts of memories that almost overwhelm us. And this pleasure has a strangely disinterested quality. We don't necessarily want to possess or be able to possess the object. The Grand Canyon, how can we possess that? We simply want to be in its presence. In fact, the word pleasure is probably the wrong word. It's too mild for the experience. We can buy pleasures. You know, if I buy a Snickers, I have the pleasure of eating it. What I cannot buy is joy. And what beauty gives us is a sort of mysterious joy, a complex emotion that, unlike pleasure, is beyond our personal power to summon or control. Then, growing out of that joyful arresting of our attention, the third stage happens. We experience a heightened perception of the shape of the meaning of things, a thrill of looking beyond our normal sense of the world. Now, it doesn't have to be a cosmic insight. It could be something as small as watching a bee settle into a flower. And the vision may be disturbing. It may be this hawk swooping down to seize its prey. But we understand that this is an intrinsic part of the natural order of the world in which we exist. And this experience of beauty is linked to a sense of truth, the deep and significant rightness in the pattern we perceive. We seem to see this beautiful and meaningful pattern unfolding in every aspect of a thing, creating a sense of unity and variety, and yet variety in the unity. We feel an illuminating radiance from the source of beauty. It is like a vision of redemptive order in a fallen world. And then the fourth and most curious part of our experience of beauty occurs. The moment vanishes. It is fleeting. It is beyond our power to control. We go from joyful elevation and sink back into the commonplace. We can stare at that landscape, that flower, that painting for another hour, but the nature of our experience changes. It becomes more limited, more, in some sense, intellectual. We have the memory of the moment, but the intense experience of stillness, joy, and enlightenment is beyond our grasp. Now, we all know how contemporary cultural theory explains beauty. Postmodern thinkers do not believe that beauty is a universal experience or a reliable means of perception, nor is beauty something that has any objective existence independent of the viewer. For them, the experience of beauty is purely a social construction. Beauty is an illusion in the eye of the beholder, a series of signs fabricated to create the impression of meaning, conditioned by social conventions, shaped by class, race, nation, gender, and ideology. A gesture by one group to raise its status or authority over another group. Beauty is all surface. Its deeper meanings are illusions created by society. Postmodern thinkers have even created a term that they substitute for beauty, a pleasure technology. Beauty is neither true nor universal. It is a consumer product, something made rather than discovered. Thank you, postmodernism, for your elegant and cynical reductions. It is a very neat and tidy intellectual strategy to reduce everything to politics and social power structures, to deny the greater meaning of anything. But this theory doesn't really feel true to our experience, which so often has nothing to do with asserting our social status or endorsing some socioeconomic value system. Nor does postmodern theory explain the frequently disinterested quality of the experience of beauty when we actually thrill at things that threaten or marginalize us. Now just imagine standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon and trying to take in this inconceivably sublime landscape. It makes us vividly conscious of our individual insignificance in the vast plan of nature. The Grand Canyon is not a subjective phenomenon. It is not a cultural fabrication that we create to assert our social status. It is part of an objective reality created by something or someone other than ourselves, to which we respond rightly with awe and wonder, and the experience of beauty in its most sublime state is part of our natural response. Now, objectivity and subjectivity are always interwoven in how humanity understands reality. Our current dilemma is that postmodernist dismissal of beauty focuses so intently on the subjectivity and the cultural bound elements of the vocabulary in which we use to describe it, that it has lost sight of the objective and universal reality that we are experiencing and trying to describe. So I'd like to suggest that we ponder for a few moments the classical and Christian notions of beauty, which have proved enormously productive for 2,000 years. In this tradition, beauty is the pleasure we get from recognizing a particular manifestation of a broader universal order. Beauty is a true and powerful way of looking into the nature of reality. Beauty is therefore one of the most powerful and natural ways of knowing the world. Now, as Christians, it is our conviction that God intends us to recognize and love him through his works. As the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins wrote, "The world is charged with the grandeur of God." Beauty is our connection to the harmonia mundi, the essential harmony of creation, and it speaks to us in our incarnated humanity. As an expression of God's will, the world and the cosmos are intrinsically beautiful when we see them truly. And as God's creations, we have been made to recognize this. Now, interestingly, this is not very different from the pagan classical definition of beauty, which looks on beauty as instruction through pleasure, and art as essentially ways of teaching us reality through delight. Beauty is not something we manufacture. It is something we recognize. We recognize outside ourselves. Artists do not make beauty. They participate in it. They perceive the beauty inherent in the world, and they represent it in their work. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas, who combined and reconciled the classical and Christian traditions, I should point out, I guess, that St. Thomas Aquinas was a Dominican, phrased it rather beautifully. Beauty makes us delight in the very act of knowing. For a Christian, beauty is truthful, joyful, and I will go on to talk about it is also transformative and revelatory. It is our recognition of the deepest tendencies and forms of the universe, the highest and most complete integrative level of understanding. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. The capacity to discern and appreciate beauty is universal. It is an inherent part of what we are as human beings. Why would God and his creation nature give humanity the pleasure reward of beauty if it was meaningless? It cannot be either coincidental or unimportant, since this response is so powerful and universal. People are transfixed by beauty, and when that happens, they intuitively know something important is going on. They feel a deep human hunger being satisfied, and once someone has experienced the beautiful, they long for more. As Oscar Wilde said, man is hungry for beauty. There is a void. I can't imagine that there's anyone in this room who has not probably many times traveled thousands of miles at considerable expense and trouble to be in the presence of something they found beautiful. Why do we do this except to fulfill a hunger for a pleasure that leads to meaning? Now, there's an English scholar and poet named Kathleen Raine. I wish I'd met her. And she, at one point in one of her books, says, "Do we not, in those cities where in architecture, sculpture, and painting the needs of the spirit are met, feel instantly at home, as if we could live there?" I mean, that's the way I feel about Florence. It's in the way I feel about the place in the country, that I have. And she goes on to say, "And do we not, in such cities as Glasgow or the wastes of suburbia, seem as if exiles living provisionally and not in our right place?" Here, Thomas Aquinas offers another compelling insight. Thomas argued that beauty goes beyond merely the pleasurable perception of what is true. Beauty does not merely illumine, it also transforms us. As it pleases and illumines, beauty elicits love. It brings us to love what God has created. So beauty leads us by pleasure and joy to wisdom, and through wisdom to love, and love transforms us. Now, you're a very polite and patient audience, but I'm sure about 50% of you have modest at best interest in what I've been saying. I mean, for God's sakes, here's a middle-aged poet telling you about Thomas Aquinas and Fyodor Dostoevsky. I mean, beauty is nice, but isn't it also kind of soft and vague? It's a luxury. It's something remote from the things that really matter, the practical things like money, politics, status. Beauty is not something that sensible grown men and women talk about, even in Nashville, the Athens of the South, where I've noticed that singers and songwriters refer to their vocation as working in the music industry. America has been a self-proclaimed and practical nation since our first Puritan settlers arrived. These folks saw very little purpose in beauty per se, and their pragmatism has in some sense been one of the great strengths of this country. Americans, especially successful Americans, believe that the important things in society are best expressed in ideas and numbers, the languages of politics, business, finance, and science. These are great abstract languages that can literally move mountains or buy them, break atoms, but the interesting thing is they are not universal languages. The trouble with our very practical American viewpoint is that most of the world, nearly all of the time, including financiers and scientists, understand things not as concepts or numbers, but only as experiential totalities. We live in a material world as incarnate beings made up of both body and soul, and we perceive our own existence holistically, simultaneously with our intellect, our emotions, our physical senses, our imagination, our intuition, and memory, without dividing them. We most naturally and characteristically perceive embodied truths rather than abstractions. We instinctively seek not logic, but beauty. The people who change the world generally make their impact by embodying their message, by putting it in stories, in songs, in poems, in images. Social and political change is not driven primarily by ideas. For example, the social and political revolution of the 1960s was not, despite thousands of books created primarily by ideology. The revolution was put into action by songs, by movies, by clothes, and I would maintain that even hairstyle had more impact than philosophy. These were things that communicated and convinced hundreds of millions of kids to change culture, politics, morals, and the economy. This revolution wasn't about logic. It wasn't about practicality. It was a search for and a celebration of a new sense of beauty in a society which was very prosperous, very practical, but no longer seemed beautiful to the young. Even in business, an understanding of beauty proves decisive. The most influential American entrepreneur of the last half century, Steve Jobs, claimed that his central animating idea for Apple came not from studying engineering, but from calligraphy, one of the few classes he actually took in his brief stint in college. He realized that the form of a thing shapes its function and meanings. All of the practical people knew that all typefaces were the same, all designs were the same, because reality was practical, functional, scientific, engineered. But Jobs understood that the form of a thing, intentionally or unintentionally, expresses its reality, its essence. And almost everyone in society recognizes this fact, although most people can't easily articulate it. We experience and understand the world far beyond our ability to explain it, even to ourselves. The failure of the public sector in the United States of America is embodied in thousands of ugly buildings and uncomfortable public spaces. These places have been built practically. They are practical and functional. They have been planned and financed and executed beautifully, to use the word ironically, by practical people. And they are practical and functional in every respect except in practice, since they communicate to the average person that the citizen is just a number in a game of cost efficiency and crowd management. The experience that Americans have walking up the steps of the Lincoln Memorial is the experience of beauty, the embodiment of our political vision of the beauty of democracy, which is expressed in great architecture, great sculpture, great landscaping, and even great language. The Gettysburg Address and an excerpt from the second inaugural address carved calligraphically into the very walls of the memorial. This is the moment that Frank Capra so famously captured in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. By contrast, if you go just about a half mile down the street in Washington, down Pennsylvania Avenue, you will come to the FBI headquarters, which is disconcerting, dehumanizing, and alienating. No wonder its ugly and brutalist exterior was used as a symbol for government deceit and cold bureaucracy in the X-Files. It appears in that series probably 2,000 or 3,000 times. Whenever they want to show you what's wrong with Washington, they show you the FBI headquarters. The architecture didn't communicate the government of the people, by the people, for the people, but government by secret police, by conspiracy. The form of things expresses meanings, whether we intend them or not. When the U.S. was a smaller, poorer country, the public buildings expressed the greatness of our nation. Just go to any small town and look at the Depression-era post office with its marble floors, its carved wooden counters, its brass fixtures, and often an original mural depicting local history on the wall. This was a vision of a beautiful society to which any citizen who entered could participate. Today, the post office is all vinyl and plexiglass. It offers no vision except expediency. We are not citizens. We are customers in a cut-rate 99-cent store vision of democracy. No wonder the American public no longer believes in its own government. The government does not seem to believe in them as alert, intelligent, sensory human beings. Until we rediscover how to embody our civic vision in beauty, a language which speaks universally, immediately, holistically, the public sector will remain more X-Files than Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Man hungers for beauty. There is a void. You don't need to build another void. If the state does not address this hunger, doesn't nourish this appetite, if it does not even acknowledge that it exists, then citizens become detached and alienated from their own civic identity, and they retreat into a private world. This, and you know this, is happening everywhere in this country today. Even in the Catholic Church, where fewer Catholics gather each Sunday at Mass, at least in part because the Church no longer offers them a beautiful vision of their God's presence in their own existence, but mostly preaches moral obligation and ethics in abstract language. Now, if you don't believe this, I would ask you to consider, as Christians, the following fact. When Jesus spoke to the multitudes, he never dabbled in theology. He did not lay out abstract laws, although he was constantly being asked for them. What he did was he told stories. He gave us parables. He embodied truths in poetry, in beautiful language that arrests and rewards our attention. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Jesus did not ask us to think our way to salvation. He asked us to see and hear and feel and taste it. Oh, taste and see, the Lord is good. If we ponder these issues, I think we can imagine at least three implications. First, there is a necessary continuity between beauty and reality, and by extension, art and reality. Beauty is not something we manufacture, it is what we discover in reality. Art is our human means for expressing beauty in the fullness of its meaning. Secondly, there's a connection between art and truth. Keats was right when he said, truth is beauty, beauty truth. And if beauty is in the eye of the beholder, it is in the beholder as he or she looks into the heart of existence. Thirdly, beauty is transformative. It leads us by joy to knowledge, and from knowledge to love. If beauty addresses our highest level, our integrative level of understanding at how the world works and what our place is in creation, then art is a universal means of awakening, expanding, and refining this cognitive power. Art, unlike philosophy or science or finance, speaks to us in the fullness of our being as incarnate selves. The challenge of life is to find our meaning in a fallen world, to find the right way to live in a world that doesn't seem exactly the place we were created for, to find, in other words, truth, and to live in consonance with this truth, and to find grace, and through grace, redemption. We don't do this as bodiless beings. We do it as hairy, heavy, hungry humans. Art is one of the ways in which God's message is heard in the world. Beauty is one of the essential ways we recognize truth in the world. Beauty is how we perceive the glory of the Lord. Give unto the Lord the glory due unto his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of his holiness. Beauty inspires us to transform ourselves and our world. It gives us a vision of our own possibilities. When Dostoevsky said, "Beauty will save the world," he wasn't issuing a social formula. He was uttering a prophecy. What he implied was that without beauty, there is no practical way to change the world, no universal means of communication and inspiration that will suffice to reach all of humanity. No more powerful way for humanity to know and love what is good and true. The world is charged by the grandeur of God. It is not an abstract or intangible grandeur. It surrounds us. We feel it. Oh, taste and see, the Lord is good. We are, by our very natures, drawn to this grandeur, this glory, this beauty. We ignore it at the risk of misunderstanding ourselves, the world, and all of creation. Beauty will change the world. So give unto the Lord the glory due unto his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of his holiness. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you for your thoughts that you've shared with us tonight, and for the images, perspectives, and truths that you have shared with us over the years. As the headmaster of St. Paul Christian Academy, and having dedicated my life to the care, the nurture, and challenge of children, I want to specifically thank you for the poem, Special Treatments Ward. It, like many of your poems, touched me deeply. It made me feel and think more deeply and appreciatively about the children that I'm entrusted to lead. If you have not read that poem, I highly recommend it to you. So my role tonight is to facilitate the question and answer. So if you would like to ask Dana a question, please come down to one of the mics. Dana will take questions for the next 10 or 15 minutes, and then afterwards be available to sign books in the foyer. As a facilitator, I am privileged to ask the first question. Mr. Gioia spoke at St. Paul today. He spoke to our entire sixth grade class, and we were blessed to welcome the sixth grade class of the Overbrook School as well. And he did very well. Sometimes speaking to 12-year-olds is not the easiest thing, but he did very well. One of the things that I did in preparing for his arrival was to read Pity the Beauty from cover to cover. What a blessing it was, and highly recommend the book to you. One of the other things that I did in preparation was to listen to Mr. Gioia's 2007 commencement address to the graduating class at Stanford University. As you may know, there was some controversy about his being chosen as the commencement speaker. Perhaps there were some who thought he wasn't famous enough, even though he's a 2-time Stanford alum. And I thought Mr. Gioia's response to those naysayers was beautiful. And I pull a quote from that speech as the framework of my question, perhaps tangentially related to the truth of beauty, but centrally related to the notion of the importance of the arts. And I quote, "There are so many other successful and meaningful ways to lead a life not denominated by money or fame. Adult life begins in a child's imagination, and we've relinquished that imagination to the marketplace." So the first question is, what do you suggest we do to ensure that our children's imaginations are piqued so that they are not wholly relinquished to the marketplace?
Thank you for such a good question. I think this is actually the major issue of education in the United States to date, no matter what level you're talking about it. I think it's even an issue that I face with college students. We no longer have children in this society. We have little consumers. And we have allowed our children essentially to become forfeit to the marketplace. I think fundamentally in raising and educating children now, we have to create a space in which they are not being sold things to. They're not, in a sense, being captive by a sort of commercial entertainment culture. And this requires a great deal of willpower from their teachers, from their parents, their grandparents, and their caretakers, because they would much rather be captive to this entertainment. Now, I believe in the marketplace. I am not an enemy of the marketplace. The marketplace has made this country wealthy. It's made this country productive. But all the marketplace does is put a price on everything. It's useful to know that price because it tells you the scarcity or the plenty that something is in. But it only tells us the price. The role of the culture, the role of our faith, is to say, what are those things beyond price? This country fought a civil war saying that human beings do not belong in the marketplace. I think that we need to have a movement, in a sense, to create, through the strength of culture, a sense, of what are those values that we possess that are equal to or greater than money and are not to be denominated in them. And surely the education of our children has to be on the top of that list. So, I think that it's not a matter of techniques. I can give you all kinds of techniques. With my son, one of them was a swift kick in the rear end at times, but these were boys. But I think what we need is a much larger response, which is to say this is a fundamental defining value that needs to be in all of our schools and in all of our homes. Okay. Well, that shut you up.
Hey, thank you. I know I get in trouble by using the word practical in my question based on what you talked about, but I really liked your illustration about form leads to the form leads to the purpose of something. Going forward in the realm of politics specifically, do you have any thoughts about how this concept of beauty can become more practical, more something that actually takes shape in the public circle?
Well, I think successful politicians tell a story about what their vision of society is and invite you to be a character in that story. And politicians are really pretty good at this. Why? Because even if they aren't much on art, they know it's a way of getting elected. But what I think we've lost in terms of our public buildings, our public education, our public services, an embodiment of the story we want to have for our own society, which is the story of democracy. And the public buildings should be buildings which express our values. And even postage stamps nowadays look like commercial stickers. I mean, I left the Citizens Stamp Advisory Committee quietly. I didn't make a public mess of it when they decided to put Harry Potter on U.S. postage stamps. That to me was the last straw. It's not even an American author. There's never been living people on American stamps before, and now we have actors. These were not values which should be, as it were, embodied. The meaning, the form of a thing is the meaning of the thing. The meaning I took away from that was that this too was for sale. And so that's what I'm talking about. You can take it almost in any direction, but it's to take these things seriously. I guess we have a question. Sister.
Thank you, Mr. Gioia. I appreciated the theme about the revelatory power of beauty, but I was also thinking about another classical theme in Plato and Augustine in particular, about the power that beauty can also have to deceive, and that at least beauty can be on the surface only and hiding something which is not beautiful in a deeper sense. So I wonder if you could offer any insights on deception.
That is really the issue which divided the Catholics and Anglicans from the Puritans. What the Puritans saw was only the danger of beauty, the deceptiveness of beauty. That's why they broke the statues, why they whitewashed the frescoes, because they felt all of those things were in temptation. And they asked us, in a sense, to be disembodied spirits, which is something that, you could, in some sense, you might be able to cultivate among the converted. But it's a very difficult thing to sustain over time, and indeed it hasn't been sustained over time. I mean, I think what you're saying is something that we don't say often enough, is that art has its responsibilities. Beauty has its responsibilities, which means that we have to look through it to the truths that it is portraying. And we have to take those things seriously. And if you want to know where to look on this, we could probably begin our conversation most productively with Hollywood or television. And I think that there's a way of thinking about it is what entertainment does. Think of an extremely violent video game. What entertainment does is give us predictable thrills in a predictable manner, and in a sense we can possess it. These are pleasures. They're not really joys. Where what art does is take us into something. It might even be a genre which gives us a predictable set of expectations, but there's always the possibility of revelation and transformation in that, which is why it's more challenging and more difficult. But you could sort of say, well, you could easily get poisoned by food, so let's not eat any. Well, the solution is to eat wholesome food and to take food responsibly. And I think it's really odd in our society is that we are saturated. The average American looks at a screen for 14 and a half hours a day now. Cell phones, computers, video games, even when you're at the bank, you're looking at a screen, there's not a teller. It's that we saturate ourselves in these things without, in some sense, holding them responsible for their content. So it's like everything else in a fallen world. You got to work to make it work, So, any other questions? I wanted to end with a couple of poems, but let's have at least another question. Is there anything else? Sir.
I'm a Christian minister, and I have a certain conviction that there's a story to be told that gives order and meaning to the universe. We live in a postmodern age in which there's doubt that there is such a story that holds things together. Do you have any hope? Do you have your eye on any story out there that people are coalescing around that can be that territory we all occupy as we gaze at the beauty and give thanks for it and name it?
You know, I hate to say it, I think the old stories are the good stories, not the right story in this case.
That's okay with me.
I mean, if we just start with the parables, it seems to me, that's a place. I mean, I think a lot of us feel discouraged. I mean, I know I do a lot of the time, but it's at some level, if what we believe is true, truth eventually prevails. Magnus est veritas. The truth is great. Now, the question is, whether, you could be an early Christian, and you could be in one of the early emperors, and you're going to have to go through a lot of persecution, before the church is legal. I don't know. I think we're at a point now where most of us feel that our values are so disregarded, are so disrespected, are so unfairly treated that we feel that we need to take action. And the most important action that we can do is to, first of all, rebuild and enliven our own communities. That's the value of the Trinity Forum. There is a discussion happening tonight in Nashville that would not happen under other circumstances. And we need to, in a sense, to have this conversation with ourselves, and then we need to have it with the rest of society. And I think that we need to find ways of taking, these things which we think of as enduring central importance, the parables, the Beatitudes, and bring them freshly and authentically to the world. If I'm not mistaken, we were asked to do this, by a pretty good authority, and maybe we haven't been doing a good job. I think in the Catholic Church, one of the problems is the laity has to take, more action and more responsibility. Can't have the poor good sisters do all the heavy lifting. And I think, I can't speak for Protestants. I think I see a lot of, really strong involvement with the Protestant laity. But I think that, we have to take, here's a way of very simply, if we lose faith that we can create the society in which we want to live, we failed. We have to have the conviction that we can create the good society, the just society. You can't do it all at once. That's the fallacy of revolutions. They usually end up with something worse than what they replaced. But if we work on this together each day, we can change the world. And my advice is that beauty has to play part of this. We need to embody what we believe in images, in stories, in songs, in all of the ways that are apprehensible to people. And as Christians, we are in a society where we have mostly lost our ability to tell our stories through the media, through entertainment, and things like this. We need to rebuild our own culture. I don't think we need to do this, in a way that is, violent or angry. We should do it with quiet confidence and a kind of understated joy. Because I think the message we have is a true and joyful one. And most people, oddly enough, in our society, haven't heard it. So anyway, that's my, do not lose faith that we can create the society in which we want to live. So let me lower the tone by ending with 3 poems. I thought I would read, it's a very small poem. It's the title poem of my book. I wanted to write a poem that was as transparent as a popular song. And I believe that poetry grows from speech, and speech is full of slang and expressions and these kind of crazy metaphors that we came up with. And so I used this, and I used the slang my dad's generation used, that my generation uses, and the one that I hear my sons using. It's called Pity the Beautiful. Pity the beautiful, the dolls and the dishes, the babes with big daddies, granting their wishes. Pity the pretty boys, the hunks and Apollos, the golden lads whom success always follows, the hotties, the knockouts, the 10s out of 10, the drop-dead gorgeous, the great leading men. Pity the faded, the bloated, the blousy, the paunchy Adonis whose luck's turned lousy. Pity the gods, no longer divine. Pity the night, the stars lose their shine. That was inspired actually by a woman I knew who's so beautiful that everybody took care of her until she got older and lost her beauty, and she'd never developed the strength that we ugly people all have. Seems like a pretty strong audience here. And then I want to read another poem. Is that my wife and I lost our first child. He died at 4 months of sudden infant death syndrome. Some of the poems in Gods of Winter are written about him. And unfortunately, there's going to be somebody in this audience probably that's lost a child. We all know of this. And so it's a very, powerful experience. The poem I want to read, though, is about an odd thing that happens when you lose a child. Because ever thereafter, I would see some kid that was about his age, and I'd say, that's what he would be like now. That's what he would be like. And so your child has a kind of phantom life that you lead through other children. And for his 21st birthday, I wrote this poem. It's called Majority, in the sense of legal majority. Now you'd be 3, I told myself, seeing a child born the same summer as you. Now you'd be 6 or 7 or 10. I watched you grow in foreign bodies, leaping into a pool, all laughter, or frowning over a keyboard, but mostly just standing, taller each time. How splendid your most mundane actions seemed in these joyful proxies. I often held back tears. Now you are 21. Finally, it makes sense that you have moved away into your own afterlife. And then I want to end with a poem. I want to talk about it just a moment. It takes its title from Shakespeare, who said, "The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact," by which he means all of them are crazy. But what he's saying is, he goes on to say, this is what Theseus, at least in Midsummer Night's Dream, says, that the odd thing is that in their craziness, they see things that sane people miss. And this is a poem that has 2 themes. The first, and this is sort of what I've alluded to, is that we lead our lives as stories. When the circumstances of our life change, we have to rewrite the story that's in our head. We're all starring in our own movie. And what that means is that every healthy life is an act of literary creation. You've got to take your own story and bring new characters into it, new circumstances into it. And and all of us face problems. We constantly have to reimagine our future that takes us out of it. In fact, a really healthy person creates a story with several chapters ahead, and the story brings you to where you want to be. That means that every child needs to be steeped in literature from an early age, at every level of education. They need to know how many plot turns, how many remarkable rescues there exist in stories. The second thing that this poem is about, which is about what I think what a healthy marriage is about. About a really enduring love. Your marriage is a kind of sexual, physical love, but the real expression of marriage, of enduring love, is a kind of endless conversation. That, in fact, you know if you're in love with someone when something isn't entirely real until you've told your beloved about it, where you take your story and wrap it back to his or hers. And this is a poem I've written for my wife. We've been married now just shy of 35 years. It's a double sonnet in a kind of weird form that I've invented, which is 7, 7, 7, and 7. And at the end of each 7 lines, I turn in the manner of a sonnet and have a slightly different theme, a slightly different language. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet. The tales we tell are either false or true, but neither purpose is the point. We weave the fabric of our own existence out of words, and the right story tells us who we are. Perhaps it is the words that summon us. The tale is often wiser than the teller. There is no naked truth but what we wear. So let me bring this story to our bed. The world, I say, depends upon a spell spoken each night by lovers unaware of their own sorcery. In innocence or agony, the same words must be said, or the restless moon will darken in the sky, the night grow still, the winds of dawn expire. And if I'm wrong, it cannot be by much. We know our own existence came from touch, the new soul summoned into life by lust. And love's shy tongue awakens in such fire, flesh on flesh and midnight whispering, as if the only purpose of desire were to explore its infinite unfolding. And so, my love, we are 2 lunatics, secretaries to the wordless moon, lying awake together or apart, transcribing every touch or aching absence into our endless, intimate palaver, body to body, naked to the night, apparelled only in our utterance. Thank you so much.
Well, Dana, that was spectacular. Thank you so much. I hope you've not only enjoyed, but even thrilled to what has been spoken this evening, and wanted to invite all of you on your seat should be an invitation to join the Trinity Forum Society. We hope that you will avail yourself of this invitation to be part of our society and community that not only makes events like this possible, but also participates in a broader conversation about the things that matters most. Dana had said earlier that much of culture is created through a conversation, and that's largely what we hope to do through having evening conversations such as this, as well as smaller conversations on an ongoing basis. And so invite you to join us tonight to avail yourself of that invitation as a special incentive to do so. If you do join tonight, we would be delighted to give you a free copy of Dana's latest poetry readings, Pity the Beautiful, from which he read from in part just now. So hope that you will do that. Dana will also be at the back once we conclude this evening, where you can buy books, get them signed, and join the society. And we hope that you'll join us for future conversations. We launched our first event here almost exactly a year ago, one day exception, with the Lincoln historian Ron White, followed by Oz Guinness, who spoke on religious freedom, and we've had basically a full house almost every time. So I want to put the next event on your calendars right now. On September 18th, we'll be hearing from historian Joe LeConte, which promises to be a real treat. And if you would like to be involved as a host or a sponsor of this event, we warmly welcome that. Please come let me know, let Brad or Ken know as well. Finally, I think it is appropriate and fitting to end with thanks, and certainly there are many people to thank who have made this evening possible. So first, I'd like to thank again our host and sponsors, the Cheris Foundation, Joe and Judy Cook, Gary and Susan Dean, Joel and Stephanie Galanter, Nathan and Laura Green, Chuck Rice, Bill and Elizabeth Minkoff, John and Carol Peterson, John and Carol Rochford, John Siegenthaler Sr., Morgan and Heather Wills, Ridley and Irene Wills, and finally, Byron and Beth Smith. And a particular word about Byron Smith, who stays in the background, but has really been the visionary catalyst that has made all of this possible. And so we are grateful for all that he has done and continues to do. I'd also like to thank our hosts, Montgomery Bell Academy, and Brad and Ken Cheeseman, the St. Paul's Academy. It's an ongoing pleasure, even a joy, to work with you both. And also would just like to thank the people who have made it happen. Our volunteers tonight, Amy Nichols and Sherry Shepard, who helped with registration, Bobby Huff, who helped with directions to make sure no one was lost, no guests left behind, Julie Dilworth, who's helping with book sales, Heather Sizemore, who's volunteering with photography, and special thanks to Lisa Schlachter, who has been an ongoing utility player helping out in a whole variety of ways. We really appreciate that, as well as the staff of MBA and St. Paul's, who in many ways have really pitched in behind the scenes. In addition, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Rebecca Good and Margaret Epperly, who has done a fantastic job with event planning. And of course, many thanks to Dana Gioia and for your presentation tonight. Thank you, and good night.